Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and toot toot, here comes another hype train rolling into the station, and that is over the Fiio FT1. This is a $150 closed back, full-size dynamic driver headphone. This was sent to me directly from Fiio. They have asked nothing in return other than a fair and honest evaluation, which you are about to receive. There are some retailers out there who sell this with whom I am an affiliate link associate, so I will put affiliate links down in the description. So if you like what I have to say about this product and you want to buy it, please consider using one of those affiliate links. I will get a small kickback, and I only use affiliate link money to keep the channel running. Okay, why do I say hype train on this? Well, ever since it was released, it has just been getting positive press everywhere, and I normally try to avoid other reviews until I get a chance with the piece myself to minimize the amount of influence on me before I listen. But this is one of those where the hype just breaks through. I'm on YouTube, I am on the forums and all of that, reading through, and people just love this thing. And so I asked Fiio to send me one. They very graciously did, and now I get a chance to report on it. And I will tell you this, in this particular case, I think I am on board the hype train. So stay tuned to find out why right after shameless self-promotion.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
All right, real quick takeaways here on the FT1. It has a sound signature that I like but don't necessarily love. But even though it is maybe not my first choice in overall sound signature from a perceived frequency response standpoint, I recognize the importance of this headphone. I think it is going to be a market disruptor in the positive direction, and I think it is also an excuse underminer. Okay, and so we will unpack all of that here as the review unfolds. So let's get into it. All right, the spec stuff right off the bat. Again, $150 US. It is a dynamic driver. It is closed back, full size. It has wooden cups here on the back. The drivers in here are rated at 32 ohms of impedance with a 98 decibel per milliwatt sensitivity. So it is a pretty easy headphone to drive. There are a couple of different color options out there. I think most of the units that I have seen pictures of and in reviews has a darker wood with black ear pads on it and that sort of thing. This is definitely a lighter color. I think I prefer the look of the darker color, but this here is, I'll just give you a good look at it here. This is the lighter colored version. Okay, up to you to decide which one you want, but now you've seen both. Again, maybe this is out there, but I haven't seen as many of this color scheme out there as the darker one. Okay, but as far as I know, all of the sound and all of that is the same between the two colors. All right, what do we want to talk about next? I mean, build, sure, it's pretty good. I mean, we have this much cup swivel here. We've got metal, right, on this, which for $150 is nice to see. Again, a wood cup here on the back. We have a single bar headband here that's got these this padding on it here in this way, a little bit of padding, okay, with the slots in the middle. It's not the softest thing or the most cushion up there, but I found that to not be an issue. Okay, the ear pads are, I mean, you get about that much ear room on there. Let's see, nice soft ear pads. I didn't find that the seal of the ear pads was ideal, but it's also not poor and that sort of thing. So the overall weight here, I don't have that in front of me. It's middling, I would say. It's about average as far as headphone heaviness goes and all of that. But the way it fits on my head is pretty good. Like this headband has a lot of contact points with the top of my head there, so there's no hot spotting or anything like that. So it's a fairly comfortable headphone up there in that way. The ear pads do get a reasonable seal, but it's not as sealed, like it is not as attenuative or as isolating, I should say, from at least ambient noise as some other closebacks I have heard. It's decent, but it is not class leading in that regard there either. Okay, let's talk about the cabling here. We have dual 3.5 millimeter cable entry here with recessed jacks. Now the recesses on there do have a fair amount of size to them. Here is one of the stock cables that is all tangled up with the other one because they send you two. You can see here that the diameter of the plugs that go into the headphone, like the barrels anyway, they are a little on the thicker side. So even though there are recessed jacks on the headphone cups, the diameter of the recesses is such that I think the vast majority of aftermarket headphone cables will fit if that is something of interest to you. This particular version of the stock cable here has the 4.4 millimeter Pentacon balanced connector on the amp end. Okay, the cable is about 4 feet, just over a meter long, maybe 1.5 meters, somewhere in that range. Okay, in length. They also send you an identical cable that has a 3.5 millimeter single-ended plug on the amp end, and then they send one of those 1/4 inch / 6.35 millimeter adapters with it. Go over there. Okay, again, same plug there on the headphone end, same length and all of that. So yes, you get two, count them, two stock cables, okay, in the package here, and they are pretty decent, right? They fit just about all amp types out there except for 4-pin XLR without an adapter, okay, in there. So there's a lot of flexibility with this cable, and honestly, these are some of the best stock cables that I have had experience with for a headphone anywhere near this price, because they're not even all that microphonic. I mean, they are a little bit, but I hardly noticed it coming through the headphone and everything. So again, I don't think you'll really need aftermarket cables unless the length of these just doesn't work for you, because these are among, again, the best stock cables that I have used, particularly for a headphone of this price. So good job to Fiio on that one. Okay, so the comfort is good. The aesthetic, I mean, I don't love the color of this one, but the aesthetic of this headphone is good. And the build quality is good. The stock cables, some of the best I've used. Okay, there is a lot going for this headphone on the build department and the accessories and all of that, and that is before we even get into the sound. So let's go ahead and transition to sound and talk about that, and why this is an important new headphone on the market, I think. So, test gear that I use to drive this. It is pretty easy to drive. To kind of test its ease of drive, I did try direct output from my Amazon Kindle Fire tablet, little 10-inch tablet that still has a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack on it. I really only did that to test power demand on there, and it was fine. Okay, not the greatest sounding thing, but again, that's just the basic headphone output from a cheap tablet. So I'm not expecting greatness, but the power seemed to be fine. Okay. Other than that, I used a Hibi R4 DAP, an iBasso DX260 DAP in there. And then for desktop gear, I used a Shitmagni Unity with the onboard ESS DAC module. I used a Fiio K11 R2R DAC amp. And then from there, I went up a little bit in quality. I used a Gishelli J2S 4499, routed through several different things, including an Aoun S17 Pro. And then also this got some time on the Black Ice Audio FX10H tube amp that I used recently and all of that. There were other things in there, but I think that's enough to throw out that I did a fairly thorough evaluation on this. Okay, what did I find here sonically? It's really good, right? Let me come back to the comment that I made earlier where the sound signature from a perceived frequency response standpoint, I like, I don't love. It is mostly neutral in its overall 1,000-foot view of the perceived frequency response, with a slight forwardness in the middle to upper ranges of the mid-range. Okay, so it has just a little bit of aggressiveness to it in its presentation as a result of that. Okay, right there, but it manages to avoid sounding shouty or hollow or honky to my ears that are very sensitive to those aspects. Okay, so and I say that so it's neutral, mostly neutral, just a slight mid-forward lean. The bass extension is good. Like, it reaches down pretty deep, but it does seem to roll off in presence just a little bit, say maybe below about 60 to 80 hertz by ear and all of that. So if you listen to a lot of sub-bass heavy music, you might notice that roll off there, but from other program material, not so much really in there. Then the air frequencies are also extended in area and all that, but they are not pushed forward in any way. So like the bass, the mid-range, and the treble, for the most part, have pretty realistic and natural relationships to each other in terms of presence. But again, with just that slight bit of middle to upper mid-range forwardness, and then a little bit of truly deep sub-bass roll-off. But neither of those things, that mid-range forwardness or the sub-bass roll-off, really have a huge impact on the overall sound. The sub-bass thing in particular is with a part of me that I just prefer having a nice, healthy, really present, rumbly sub-bass. And this doesn't quite deliver there, but again, it is far from poor in that area. And then with the mid-range forwardness, it does have just a slightly aggressive presentation to it with some material. So like, I listen to a lot of hard rock and heavy metal kind of stuff, and with distorted electric guitars and that sort of thing, particularly with recordings that are not the best, which are frequent when you're talking about hard rock and heavy metal, it could get just a little bit fatiguing with that forwardness and aggression through the mid-range here after long listening sessions. But for the most part, it didn't bother me, and I'd have to go like well past the hour mark before I would start to notice those fatigue issues there through the upper mids. Okay. The thing that impresses me the most about its frequency response, though, is how well tonally balanced it is. And to me, this is the really impressive part about this headphone. It's just how smooth the frequency response is. The relationships between fundamental frequencies and their harmonics are very natural, very organic, and very realistic to my ears. And I have not heard that level of realism in the tonal balance from many headphones at this price period, but especially closed back headphones. So that's really the big party trick that this one brings to the table that really truly impressed me here with it, is just the tonality of it is so smooth. It really seems to avoid any narrow peaks or recesses through the frequency response. It's just nice and even and well balanced through all of it. So sibilants, sharp S's and T's, very rarely ever happen, and it sounds cliche, but it's true here. They really only happened when they were present in the recording. You know, likewise, like, I can handle, I think, that slight mid-range forwardness that I'm talking about because it's a shelf-like boost instead of a peak. So it manages to avoid shoutiness, honkiness, hollowness, that kind of thing, where you have narrow ranges of forwardness or recesses in its frequency response. So again, it's just the smoothness of the response, the balance of it that is really impressive on here. There's no jagged peaks or dips or anything in the frequency response, which is rare for headphones of this price and much more expensive. And that's true whether we're talking open back or closed back, but the fact that this does it in a closed back form factor is really truly impressive. And I think that's where this becomes a market disruptor and an underminer of excuses, which I will unpack those two statements here more in a little bit. Okay, other presentational aspects of the sound. Good dynamics. Okay, there is a fair amount of hit to the low end. So kick drums have a nice satisfying attack to them. Snare drums are nice and snappy, especially since they have that little bit of mid-range forwardness in there. Snare drums and that sort of thing, they have a really nice, aggressive, but not over-the-top aggressive attack on them and that sort of thing. Now, the slightly rolled off sub bass means that kick drum hits don't always have quite the level of fullness to them and weight behind that impact that I personally would like, but it's not bad, and I don't think a lot of people are going to notice or be bothered by that. Okay, so again, fun dynamics. It's got a lively, active kind of sound to it overall. But again, it does it without being too aggressive or too forward most of the time. Again, I got a little bit fatigued with very aggressive music over long periods of listening, but I can usually listen for a good hour before I have to worry about any of that, okay? And let's face it, the number of times that I can sit down and listen uninterrupted for an hour straight, not very often anymore, so, you know, that's really not a big deal. I have to be very intentional about sitting for really long listening sessions when and if I am able to on my own personal schedule. All right. Okay, other than that, like the detail retrieval and the resolution and the texturing are also like class leading for the price, okay? We'll talk of comparisons here in a little bit. There are some open back headphones at this price that might just edge this out in terms of detail retrieval and resolution, but this is probably the best in those traits that I have heard for a closed back at this price, and frankly it reaches up, I think, to some higher priced closed backs and does better there in those categories as well. And then the holography. Not stunning, not stellar, but again, it is only $150. But for $150, the three-dimensionality of the soundstage and the imaging, the separation, the depth, the layering, and all of that, really impressive. Put all of this together, and for the most part, on a lot of genres of music that I listen to, this was a very enjoyable and very pleasing listen most of the time. That mid-range forwardness with some very aggressive and poorly recorded recordings can get a little bit in the way. I, every once in a while, got distracted by the bit of sub-bass roll-off that happened where kick drums and all of that weren't quite as full as I would like them to sound, okay? But those are minor quibbles when we talk about everything that this thing gets right and what it gets right here at this price point. Okay, so let's go ahead and do some comparisons here. And like, I think a natural comparison is with the Sivga SV021, which is another $150 dynamic driver closed back headphone that I reviewed recently, okay, with wooden cups on it to boot. Okay, some similarities and some differences here. The Sivga is just slightly easier to drive. Both of these headphones, very easy to drive, but this one I think had something like 113 decibel per milliwatt sensitivity, and this one is 98 decibel per milliwatt. So the Fiio needs just a little bit more power to reach the same volume levels and to maximize its potential, but not a lot. Like, both of these are pretty amp friendly when it comes to power requirements, and they can be driven on most anything out there. Honestly, it's just that you'll need to push the Fiio just a little bit louder, but not a lot, okay? Another thing that jumps out to me that was a little bit different is the Sivga, if you remember from my review, was one of the weirdest headphones that I've ever reviewed in regard to how it responded to amplifiers. It really preferred op-amp-based amplification rather than discrete and transistor-based amplification, which is very unique and odd amongst headphones of any type and at any price. Okay, so see my review for a further unpacking of that. The Fiio did not have that issue. The FT1 sounds pretty good on just about any kind of amplifier. Like the Fiio K11 R2R sounded almost as good as the Shit Magni Unity does, which is my experience generally. The Shit Magni Unity, in terms of just pure audio performance as a DAC amp, just edges out the Fiio K11 R2R on just about every transducer I tried, except for the Sivga, which was backwards on that one relative to the rest of headphonery. Okay, but the Fiio FT1 came back to normal on that. Like, it responded a little bit better to, you know, discrete transistor-based amplification than it did to op-amp-based kind of amplification, opposite of this one, but it still sounds pretty good on the op-amp-based amplification there too. So that was one difference here between the two. The FT1 is just a little bit more friendly to amplifiers in terms of amp type, but does demand just slightly more power than the Sivga. As far as sonic differences and similarities go, the Sivga has more sub-bass energy and rumble and all of that. So if you are a bass head, I think the signature of the SV021 will match you a little bit better in that regard. However, the overall tonality is smoother and more realistic on the FT1 than it is on the Sivga. Both are very good, both for their price and for being closed back. It's just that the FT1 is smoother, more realistic, and more natural in terms of its tonal balance on there too. I think the FT1 is also just the more natural and organic sounding headphone between these two generally. The Sivga can lean into just being a little bit shouty and honky in comparison to what the FT1 can do. I think the FT1 also it's a little bit more separated in its sound. It does a little bit better job of separating instrument sounds from each other, instrument and vocal sounds from each other and all that, where the SV021 is just a hair more congested in direct comparison. Both very good, all that. The sound stage on the Sivga, though, is bigger. So if you like a big and expansive sound stage, then this is the way to go here in regards to these two. Now, I enjoyed the Sivga a little bit more on slower paced, like EDM, hip hop, some heavy metal that is of slower pace, fewer beats per minute kind of thing, because of the added bass presence and slam that comes with that, just more weight to the bass tones on this one. This one engaged me just a little bit on those genres of music. But if you were to ask me which one I prefer more often for more genres of music, it's definitely the FT1, just because it's more even tonality, matches better with more genres of music, okay, out there. All right. My reference headphone for the entry level and into the audiophile space is still the HiFiMan HE400 SE. Planar magnetic and open back. So very different type than the FT1. But why do I pull this out? And that's just to tell you, like, where does the FT1 just fit in amongst headphones, period, in terms of like the entry level price performance ratio, all of that kind of thing. I think the HE400 SE is still $109. So it is $40-ish cheaper than what the FT1 is. But the FT1 comes very, very close to the HE400 SE in terms of detail retrieval, resolution, spatial holography, and all of that. I think the HE400 SE has a little bit more sub-bass extension, so it does that weight and fullness behind kick drum hits and that sort of thing a little bit more realistically than the FT1 does. It also does not have that slight mid-range forwardness, so that part I do not find as fatiguing as I do on the FT1 over long periods of listening. The HE400 SE is heavier than the FT1, and it does have a hotspot here at the top of the headband on the top of the head, so it is less comfortable. The FT1 is more comfortable than the HE400 SE here in my opinion. The HE400 SE also harder to drive and has a strong preference for, discrete transistor-based amplification over op amps, where this one has just a milder preference for the discrete designs. Okay, there. I think overall the HE400 SE is the better sounding headphone, just because it has slightly more resolution, slightly more holography, and that sort of thing. And if you swap away from its stock cable, you do get that wicked treble peak that's in here, mostly out of the way on the HE400 SE. So I think it is just as a pure headphone price to performance ratio, I would still edge out the full HE400 SE over the FT1, but it is very, very close. You throw in the fact that the FT1, though, is much easier to drive, it is more comfortable, and it's closed back, so it gets you into the use cases that are closed back friendly, that are not open back friendly. Okay, then you could also argue that the FT1 might be the overall better value if you are looking for a use case that needs closed back and all of that. So, but again, very, very close. The FT1 comes very, very close. So, let me talk about here why I say the FT1 is a disruptor and an underminer of excuses. And it comes back to the smoothness of that tonality, okay? The smoothness of the frequency response. The lack of peaks, of sharp peaks and dips in its frequency response. It's just so smooth and balanced in its overall tonality, and that's its biggest party trick. That is very, very rare. Like, it is less peaky yet than the HE400 SE is most of the time, right? That's disruptive to the market because one of the things that plagues entry-level audiophile headphones is they tend to have very narrow peaks and dips in their frequency response, which, if they hit in the 4 to 8 kilohertz range, you get a lot of sibilance, sharp S's and T's that can be sharp and grating and fatiguing. Okay, and then if you listen to them, they can have either a narrow bump or a recess in their mid-range, which can make them sound very hollow or honky or shouty in their mid-range timbre. Or they get very boomy or sloppy in the mid-bass because there's some bloat there and all of that just becomes distracting. And this manages to really avoid all of those. Okay, which is impressive for any headphone at its price, but is even more impressive when it's a closed back. So that's the market disruption point. It's just like just the smoothness of that tonality at $150 sets a new standard to my ears there that the rest of the market needs to step up and meet, if not surpass, at the price point. But an underminer of excuses is because it does it as a closed back. It's even harder to get that smoother tonality, that well-balanced frequency response with great relationships between fundamentals and harmonics, okay, in a closed back design. Okay, it's just very difficult to do, but Fiio figured out how to do it and do it for $150. So that means that above this price, no one has an excuse anymore. Okay, we need that tonal smoothness now everywhere. Now, if you want to push the mid-range forward so that vocals stand out and do it in a shelf-like way, fine. If you want to give it a bass shelf, okay, and do it in a shelf-like way, fine. If you want a brighter sound, but you bring the treble up, but do it in a shelf-like way for listening, tuning preferences, fine. But what I'm talking about here are those sharp peaks and dips in the frequency response. This shows that those should not exist anymore, period. So going forward, all other manufacturers of closed backs out there need to take note of this and realize that you do not have to have those sharp peaks and dips in your frequency response for a closed back really of any price anymore. And so that is the undermining of excuses that I'm talking about with this headphone. So, does the Fiio FT1 get my recommendation? Yes, for sure. Am I on board this particular hype train? Yes, I am. Okay, so for $150, come and enjoy the ride with me here on this hype train. Or, I'm going to push this out before Christmas 2024. Give it to your kids, give it to a loved one, get somebody else hooked on audio there as your Christmas present to them. This would be a great way to go about that. All right. So I'm Wave Theory. Thanks for watching my review of the Fiio FT1 $150 closed back headphone. It's pretty great. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, check out my PayPal, my Patreon. Generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels. Thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.